rate among paramedic students for the problem. Linda Lopez, Channel 4 News.
Less than 24 hours before the Carey case, another call went out for help for a 71-year-old woman. But as Pat Collins reports, the ambulance went to the wrong part of town.
The victim, 71-year-old Frances Campbell, who died after a district ambulance was about a half an hour late responding to 911 calls for help. Yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Campbell went into the National Bank of Washington office at 8th and 8th Streets Northeast. She was there to cash a check. Once inside the door, she suffered a heart attack. An off-duty D.C. policeman working security saw what happened and immediately called for help. The first 911 call for help was made at 2:48 p.m., but the ambulance wasn't dispatched until 2:52, 4 minutes later. Now, dispatchers have told me that when they get a call for an unconscious person, they're supposed to dispatch an ambulance right away. Why did they wait for 4 minutes? And if that's not bad enough, when they finally did dispatch an ambulance, they sent it to the wrong place. Instead of sending the ambulance to the bank at 8th and 8th Streets Northeast, the dispatcher sent it to 8th and 8th Streets Northwest, 16 blocks away. Eventually, Mrs. Campbell was taken to Capitol Hill Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Would she had survived if taken to the hospital sooner? Dr. James Trone of the Capitol Hill Hospital staff says it's hard to say. The sense is it may have made a difference. Captain Ted Holmes says the dispatcher who made the mistake was a trainee. He says the fire department is sorry.
But at this time, I do not believe the department is anticipating any disciplinary action. It's an error that any dispatcher could have made.
Dr. Howard Champion of MedStar, an expert in emergency medical care, says this is another example of the incompetence of the ambulance service here.
This is just another item in the litany of mind-boggling incompetence that we continue to see from the fire department.
Dr. Champion and others wonder how many more deaths it's going to take before the city fixes the ambulance service. I'm Pat Collins, Channel 4 News.
It was 4 months ago that the city announced it would find a new civilian chief to run 911 and fix its problems. As yet, no new chief has been named.
And there are more questions tonight about the district's ability to rescue people from the river. Channel 4 News has learned that the district failed to call the closest trained river rescue team when a helicopter crashed in the Washington Channel 2 weeks ago. 3 people were killed in that crash. The D.C. Harbor Police and fire crews came to the rescue, but the police weren't carrying scuba diving gear and the fireboat doesn't have any. The National Airport Rescue Team does have the equipment. That team was a mile downriver from the crash, but was not called. And today, Jack Cloherty talked to the chief of that team.
Do you find that unusual that you weren't called in officially?
I wouldn't say it's unusual due to the circumstances with that incident.
The airport rescue team found out about the crash by overhearing D.C. police and radio transmissions. The team went to the scene, but by the time they got there, it was too late.
DC system. He said he needed time to evaluate the situation before making recommendations. He did say he would like to cut down on the ambulance response time, which now averages about 10 minutes, twice the national average.
Well, response time is one of the most important elements in an emergency medical service. And it's an element that deserves very, very high priority attention.
But Kavanaugh said an 8-minute response time for 911 calls is adequate. He refused to compare the D.C. ambulance service with Philadelphia's, which operates under their fire department. When asked if the D.C. service should remain under the auspices of the city's fire department, Kavanaugh was briefly upstaged.
He recommends and I make that final decision. We are in charge here.
Regardless of how much authority Mr. Kavanaugh will ultimately have, many members of the medical community are enthusiastically applauding his arrival.
What we needed was someone whose sole professional expertise is in the technical provisions of providing medical care in an emergency situation. That's what he knows how to do.
In addition to charges of slow response time, there are questions of inadequate training and a lack of equipment. City officials admit Kavanaugh has a tough job ahead. Those who will be working under him, however, have high hopes for big changes.
The training, more street drills, so that the people know the areas, know the streets, which will improve response times for the ambulances and give the public better service.
I hope this is an end to the way that people look at the Emergency Ambulance Division, and I hope it's a new beginning for the entire city.
Catherine Couric, News 4, Washington.
Kavanaugh will assume his new duties in the middle of next month.
It's painfully obvious by now that the new ambulance chief has his work cut out for him. And nobody has known more pain from this situation than the victims of ambulance service errors, their families and their friends. Since News 4 uncovered this story last spring, 10 people have died, and many others have waited uncomfortably too long for help. Pat Collins has the story.
An ambulance. It's a symbol of speed, authority, and care, especially to the victims. And when it doesn't deliver, it can be disastrous. One night in Northwest, after dialing 911, William Grayson's family was going through sheer panic.
I never went through anything like this. Blood all over the place.
William Grayson had been spitting up blood. The ambulance took 50 minutes. It left a terrible mark on the already tragic moments of a husband's death.
When I couldn't even hold my husband in his last hours, my kids was home. I had to be on the phone still trying to get 911.
In Northeast, another lost ambulance turned fear into horror.
Did you ask them where the ambulance was?
Yeah. They asked me. I asked them. My grandmother was hollering, you know, where is it? And then they said they lost.
Michael McDaniel had suffered a severe asthma attack. The ambulance took 30 minutes.
And they were screaming, he's passing out, set him down, where are your medications? And I just kept showing him my medications.
Again in Northwest, still another lost ambulance. Jean Dean had had an asthma attack, and the ambulance took 12 minutes to go less than a mile and a half to her home.
I ran out onto Western Avenue and flagged down the ambulance and told them, pointed to the house and told them to turn into the street.
Medical 11, you have Med 6.
Sadie Tolliver's ambulance wasn't lost, but it might just as well have been. Her stepsons couldn't make the dispatcher understand that she'd begun vomiting blood, that they were afraid she was dying.
And I told him what was wrong, and I said, my mom's real sick, she's vomiting, looks very bad, could you please send an ambulance? He asked me a bunch of questions, you know. I couldn't diagnose because I didn't know, you know. I just knew that she was looked very ill.
Sadie Tolliver passed out. Her stepsons tried mouth to mouth. 10 minutes passed.
You know, I was very upset, and I called him again. And I said, could you please send an ambulance? I think she is dead.
They called a third time. Then 37 minutes after the first call, the ambulance arrived. Sadie Tolliver was dead. Like Jean Dean's daughter and Sadie Tolliver's stepsons, Phyllis Huzakowski's co-workers at the Harrington Hotel tried to do what they could in the absence of faster help. Mrs. Huzakowski had suffered a heart attack.
Medic 18 is at 5.
Medic 18, 14, 21.
A computer mix-up delayed the ambulance.
When we first called for an ambulance, she was conscious and talking, and by the time they got here, she had stopped breathing.
And we laid her down, and we put a blanket underneath her head, and then she started, you know, spitting up a little bit of fluid, and I'm still looking for the rescue squad, but I didn't know what to do, you know. I didn't want to do the wrong thing.
The ambulance got there in 30 minutes. It took Phyllis Huzakowski to George Washington Hospital, but minutes later, she died. Her daughter says,
I don't think you realize it until it hits home, what's happening out there.
If you had to call 911 in the city today for help, how would you feel about that?
Frightened.
Some who have had this experience hit home wouldn't even dial 911 again. People like Constance Bennett, who fell and hurt her legs and waited 40 minutes for an ambulance.
I wouldn't call them. I wouldn't call 911. I'd get one of my neighbors to take me to the doctor.
Like Maria Brown, who waited 42 minutes after her cab hit a bus and she suffered neck injuries.
I think I would probably call someone else before I consider calling 911.
Some believe that if they'd had a better response from 911, a life would have been saved. Sadie Tolliver's stepson thinks so.
If they'd have got hit quicker, point blank, I think she would have been hit this day.
Phyllis Huzakowski's daughter thinks so, too.
Do you think it's possible they could have saved your mom?
Yes, I do.
As for Jean Dean's daughter?
And she could have possibly lived.
Still be alive.
But we'll never know.
But she'll be here for my birthday tomorrow.
I'm Pat Collins,
News 4 Washington.
911 may be the only crisis that the new Chief John Kavanaugh has to worry about, but it is not the only problem that is confronting the Barry administration tonight.
Tonight, the first witness
reports that it bought fire trucks that are simply too big for the firehouses and for some city streets as well. Joe Johns reports the fire department invited the press to take a look at their new state-of-the-art equipment.
Two big, long fire trucks with ladders that can reach the tops of tall buildings. Recent purchases of the D.C. Fire Department. The fire chief says this is what his department needs to do its job in some parts of the city. But opponents of fire department administration are saying these trucks don't fit in some firehouses and are too big to maneuver on some D.C. city streets. Claims that the fire department denies.
These trucks were bought because they're the best trucks made today. And this city needs these trucks.
It's state-of-the-art, but the question is whether D.C. needs it. The fuss over this type of thing goes all the way back to November of 1984, when a ranking officer wrote D.C. Fire Chief Theodore Coleman. The letter warned that a small, maneuverable replacement truck was needed for a firehouse in Georgetown, but the replacement did not work out so well. The new Truck 5 started causing problems for the D.C. Fire Department the day it went into service. It was originally scheduled to be headquartered here at the fire station on Dent Place in Georgetown, but they found the truck was so big it wouldn't fit in the doors. Truck 5 was moved to a firehouse on Reservoir Road, then moved again to a station house on Rhode Island Avenue. But the story did not end there. Soon the fire department bought another huge new truck, one that was supposed to go to the station on Martin Luther King Avenue in Southeast. The fire chief denied that it, too, was bigger than the firehouse doors, but for some reason it was also reassigned to another station on Atlantic Street in Southeast. The Firefighters Union, critics of the administration, wrote an alarmist letter to the council member for the area where the fire truck is based. But Wilhelmina Rolark wasn't going along with it.
In light of the fact that we've just gotten the equipment, that you do have to wait and see in some instances, and that's what I'm doing in my ward. I'm very happy that we have one of them in our ward.
The bottom line on this story is whether the new trucks represent progress or stupid management. Joe Johns, News 4 Washington.
The fire department says it knew that the trucks purchased were too big for some of the station houses where they were assigned, but it says their state-of-the-art capabilities outweigh these problems with size.
Sports next. George.
The items called Snap and Pop are considered fireworks and are illegal in Northern Virginia. But the D.C. Fire Department considers them appropriate gifts in their efforts to teach fire prevention. Dave Statter reports.
The box says not recommended for children under 8. Handle carefully. But a D.C. firefighter says this box of Snap and Pop trick noisemakers was handed to his young son by the D.C. Fire Department's Prevention Division at Saturday's 6th Annual Firefighters Parade. Snap and Pops are illegal in Arlington and Fairfax, but legal in D.C.
They called my son over to the table and gave him a lollipop, bubble gum, and a box of Snap and Pops.
How old's your son?
My son's 3 years old.
Did you know what a Snap and Pop was?
Well, I didn't. All I saw was a yellow box, and I assumed it was candy, but I thought it looked funny, so I took it out of his hand.
This is what's inside one of the Snap and Pop boxes. A little item such as this. You take it and just throw it on the ground.
When we're trying to educate the youth not to play with fireworks, not to play with matches, to give them something of this nature that's explosive, it baffles me. I don't know what kind of logic was behind it. Yes, it may be legal, but so is gasoline. You don't give gasoline to children to play with.
Tippett is also concerned a young child could ingest the Snap and Pops. D.C. Fire Marshal Joseph Quander said by phone the items were handed out to children who correctly answered fire prevention questions and compares them to caps used in cap pistols. Quander believes the items were appropriate to give children something they'd remember in an effort to remind them of the seriousness of fire prevention. I'm Dave Statter, Eyewitness News Nightcast.
About 50% of her body. She's taken to MedStar where she's pronounced dead. They found the body of another woman in the basement of the house where the fire apparently started. She has a rope wrapped around her neck as if she'd been strangled or hung. Now, what investigators are trying to figure out is whether this is some sort of bizarre murder-suicide with an arson fire, or whether it's a double murder with an arson fire set to cover up the murder. Homicide investigators, fire department investigators on the scene, and they're still working on the case. Jim?
Thank you, Pat. We'll have more on this story at 11 o'clock, Dave.
Jim, tonight, one of the...
No units were available.
We're still not
sure as to whether the request had been made prior to. Our records don't indicate that there had been a request for a medic unit prior to the call to fire department headquarters. We just did not have anything at the time to send them. As soon as a unit became available, we then, in fact, provided the embassy with a medic unit.
Now the concern is on New Year's Eve, when the demand for ambulances is great. Fire department administrators promise this time they'll be ready. Fire department officials say it is too soon to declare the district's ambulance crisis over. But they maintain they're confident all the steps that can be taken are being taken. Del Walters, News 7, the district.
And John Cavanaugh, the new head of the ambulance service, was not available for comment today. Cavanaugh came to the district from Philadelphia. He took over the ambulance service in mid-October.
Been used to protect the president, but Eyewitness News uncovered
replace some of the worn-out equipment used by firefighters who provide protection to President Reagan during helicopter landings at the White House. This comes following an Eyewitness News report yesterday that some of the crews are wearing gear that would be useless in the event of a crash and fire in the president's chopper. Today, Eyewitness News has been told of more problems that could make the rescue of the president very difficult. Dave Statter has more in this report.
Last night's full-scale fire drill at the White House showed the D.C. Fire Department's concern for protection of the president. The drill was a surprise to most Secret Service agents and tourists along Pennsylvania Avenue. The goal was to familiarize firefighters with the executive mansion and test the response of White House security forces. But a number of firefighters tell Channel 9 a major area involving fire protection for the president has been ignored and neglected for years. These special suits are worn by D.C. firefighters assigned to 4 trucks that are on hand whenever President Reagan's helicopter takes off or lands at the White House. Following Channel 9's report yesterday, the D.C. Fire Department now says they will replace some of this gear because it is worn and damaged. This was a helmet used this past summer by a firefighter assigned to protect the president.
The object of the suit is to reflect the heat from the flames. Now, if there's cracks in these suits, the heat goes right through the suit. It's not as insulated as our regular firefighting gear that we have now.
Fire protection engineers tell us some of this gear was state-of-the-art back in the early 1970s, and firefighters say they've been asking department officials to replace this equipment for years. While officials say they're going to get rid of worn-out equipment, they defend the gear they have now.
Based on what we've observed, based on talking to the commanding officer of that unit, that he feels confident that the suits are adequate for the job that they're being asked to provide protection to the president's helicopter.
But there are more problems with this equipment. Some of the hoods are made with asbestos, a known cancer-causing agent. Other fire departments have discontinued use of these type hoods. And Eyewitness News has learned there may be a much larger problem with the protection of the president. Some firefighters say the special chemical carried in these trucks to extinguish a fire may not ever make it out of the tank. Sources say there have been a number of times over the years when the dry chemical caked up and wouldn't come out when test fired. Firefighters say the trucks need to be fired and reloaded on a more regular basis.
How would you feel if you were in a standby status, the President of the United States is flying in, and your #1 job is for the protection of his life? And you're waiting there, you're in your full protective gear that is substandard, and you're sitting with a piece of apparatus that you possibly may not have ever operated before, and you're waiting for the president to land.
And you don't know if you do operate it that it's going to work.
It's a shaky feeling.
Fire Department spokesman Captain Holmes says he is not sure at this point exactly when the equipment to replace the worn gear will arrive, but says it is a high priority. I'm Dave Statter, Eyewitness News.
Divers ill-prepared to begin rescue efforts immediately. This is the second incident in a week that has highlighted the need for a better coordinated and equipped diving program. Catherine Couric has more.
When a car went into the tidal basin early this morning, witnesses say police divers were not able to begin recovery efforts for 10 to 15 minutes. A diver arrived at the scene with only 1 tank of air. He sent a colleague to get more air tanks and waited for another certified diver from the D.C. Harbor Patrol to arrive on the scene. Fortunately, no one was in the car. If there had been, he or she might have faced the same fate Ricky Boggs did last week. His car plunged into the Anacostia River, and police divers who arrived on the scene had no diving equipment. They had to return to their base to pick it up, despite the fact that in September, Mayor Berry ordered the harbor police to carry scuba diving equipment at all times. The move was prompted by the helicopter crash in the Washington Channel on August 21st. That was another case of the harbor police arriving on the scene without the proper scuba gear. This time it meant the first victim was not pulled out for 20 minutes. All 3 on board died. Some believe all these incidents add up to one thing. The fire department should be involved in water rescue efforts.
And the fire department's emphasis should be on water rescue, life-saving, as opposed to the police department's approach, which is take our time, get there, bring in divers from home if we need to, and recover.
Tippett says that oftentimes firefighters are the first to arrive on the scene. That was the case at the tidal basin this morning. But because they have no diving equipment, their hands are tied. That will be changing very soon, however. The D.C. Fire Department has been mandated by Congress to begin its own dive program. $10,000 has been appropriated for diving gear, and a dozen certified divers will be on duty at all times, strategically placed throughout the community for quick response.
2 on each heavy-duty rescue squad. There are 4 heavy-duty rescue squads, and 2 assigned to and on duty at each of the fireboats.
For a total of 12.
For a total of 12.
Successful rescues elsewhere in the country only play up Washington's weaknesses. Last week, 11-year-old Garza Alvaro left the hospital. On December 14th, the boy was pulled out of the icy Red River in Fargo, North Dakota, after he had been submerged for 40 minutes. Miracle rescues like these, according to Tippett, underscore the need for more divers and more equipment here in the nation's capital. Catherine Couric, News 4, Washington.
Tippett expects the fire department program to be in place sometime early next year.
17 got lost. Their dispatcher gave them the wrong cross street, and the ambulance drove around for 29 minutes trying to find 11th place.
This was an exception. A costly exception, though. And certainly, from a personal point of view, my condolences go out. The chief was, as I mentioned earlier, the chief was physically upset, shaken today by this unfortunate incident.
The fire chief today ordered all ambulance crews to know exactly where they're going before leaving the station. And Anna Mae Glover perhaps would get some consolation if her son's death was the final lesson in the district's 911 tragedy of errors.
Because if everybody do like I did, call for the ambulance and no one show, it's going to be somebody else going to.
I'm Gary Reels, News 7.
District fire officials tell News 7 they're in the process of bringing a new $15 million communication system online. They say they hope...
Bleeding from the mouth and dizziness and then we waited for about 10-15 minutes and they still haven't arrived, and I called back.
We waited for about 5 or 6 minutes or probably 10 minutes. We left the house probably 10 minutes after 9. We arrived at the hospital about 20 after 9. We called back to the house to find out if an ambulance service has ever arrived to the house.
It hadn't. Ambulance 17 didn't arrive until 9:37. Mazan Kelly was pronounced dead at D.C. General.
There were a number of small things that fell through the crack, and it just is an unfortunate incident that all of those small things came together to produce the fact that we were not able to get a unit on the scene timely.
The biggest problem was that Ambulance 17 was lost, bad directions, and unfamiliarity with the location. 11th place is not in the index of the maps provided D.C. ambulances after a Channel 9 report last year about an ambulance that got lost. But we were able to find 11th place clearly on the same map. The 2-mile trip this afternoon from Ambulance 17's quarters to the house took us 6 minutes. Despite a new director and promises of an overhaul of the ambulance system, the D.C. government is still having difficulty providing emergency ambulance care. Sources in the ambulance service tell us that many of the problems we've reported about in the past still exist, and in some cases have gotten worse.
I definitely have to say that it is better, because we are working diligently daily on bringing the service up to what it should be, that it has gotten better.
The D.C. Fire Department says they will continue to look at what went wrong after the Kelly family called for help yesterday morning.
Ambulance service is taking the blame and the heat for yet another ambulance delay in the city.
And like so many other cases, the victim is dead. Joe Johns reports.
Ambulance 17, headquartered on Rhode Island Avenue, was dispatched to a townhouse in the 1600 block of 11th Place around 9 o'clock yesterday. But it didn't get there until 9:40. The call first came in because Mazone Kelly was bleeding from the mouth. Soon he passed out. Eventually, the family had to drive him to D.C. General Hospital. Kelly died, and family members are grief-stricken and angry at the same time.
I think, if they would have got here, in approximately time, he probably could have been saved. And for 45 minutes or 40 minutes, it took them to get to 11th Place. I think that was a disaster on their behalf.
It's just something I just can't get over. It's been just hurting me. Just take his life. Looked like he could have been saved if the ambulance had got here in time.
The fire department says a whole series of things went wrong. In fact, they found at least 5 problems in an investigation that began just yesterday. The dispatcher told the ambulance crew that the nearest intersection was at Holbrook Street, but it wasn't. It was at Holbrook Terrace. The family called 911 3 times, the 3rd time saying that Mazone Kelly was unconscious. At that point, authorities say the dispatcher should have upgraded the priority of the emergency and noticed that the ambulance should already have been on the scene. But an upgrade was not given, and the delay was apparently not noticed. That was a critical point because the ambulance was lost. The crew was looking for 11th Place Northeast, which is not on the map.
In no way, and believe me on this instance, I don't even profess to make any excuses for the department for what has happened. In terms of terminology, we have to take this one full blunt.
Holmes says one of the dispatch workers in this case was inexperienced. The fire chief now wants new maps based on census tracts that have already been checked to make sure they include all the city streets. The chief also has issued a directive to all ambulance crews to call in the minute they think they can't find a location. Joe Johns, News 4 Washington.
The fire chief reportedly held a meeting at which he yelled at his department heads today. He reportedly called them in spite of the holiday, to try to figure out some changes for the system.
Investigators say a fire that heavily damaged a drugstore in northeast Washington is looking more and more like arson. The fire at the Dart Drug at Michigan and Eastern Avenues was reported about 8 o'clock last night and reached 2 alarms before it was brought under control. It took a 2-hour battle to put it out. 2 firefighters were hurt in the process.
Feeling almost like a heat wave, blamed for yet another ambulance delay, a delay that is adding to the grief of a family in mourning. Joe Johns reports.
Mazone Kelly was bleeding from the mouth. Family members called 911. Ambulance 17, stationed on Rhode Island Avenue, was dispatched to pick up Kelly around 9 o'clock yesterday morning, but it did not get there until 9:40. Soon, Kelly passed out, and the family had to drive him to D.C. General Hospital, where he died. Family members are grief-stricken and angry at the same time.
It's just something I just can't get over. It's been just hurting me. Just take his life. Looked like he could have been saved if the ambulance had got here in time.
The fire department says at least 5 different things went wrong. First, the ambulance crew got lost. They were headed for 11th Place Northeast, and while the street exists, it's not listed on the map they were using. The dispatcher told the ambulance crew that the nearest intersection was Holbrook Street, but it isn't. It is Holbrook Terrace. Authorities say the family called 911 3 times. The 3rd time they said that Mazone Kelly was unconscious. At that point, authorities say, the dispatcher should have upgraded the priority of the emergency and noticed that the ambulance was running late. But an upgrade was not given, and the delay was apparently not noticed. On top of all of this, authorities say, one of the dispatch workers on the call was inexperienced.
In no way, and believe me on this instance, I don't even profess to make any excuses for the department for what has happened. In terms of terminology, we have to take this one full blunt.
The fire chief now wants new maps based on census tracts that have already been checked to make sure they include all the city streets. The chief also has issued a directive to all ambulance crews to call in the minute they think they can't find a location. Joe Johns, News 4 Washington.
In Fairfax County, a man called 911 and got just what he needed. Over the phone,
Find 1641 11th Place Northeast on their maps. 11th Place is not listed in the index, but it is on the map. Man who needed emergency help, 39-year-old Mason Kelly, finally arrived at D.C. General Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. His brothers decided not to wait for the ambulance.
Approximately 9 o'clock, I dialed 911, okay. I told him like he was bleeding from the mouth and dizziness and, well, and then we waited for about 10, 15 minutes and they still haven't arrived, you know, and I called back.
After Kelly's brothers arrived at the hospital, they called back to the house to see if the ambulance had arrived. It had not. It took the crew 35 minutes to make what should have been a 2-mile trip. The D.C. Fire Department is still investigating. Officials say this is a case that fell through the cracks for a number of reasons.
And I'm Jim Vance. Mazone Kelly died last Sunday after waiting 40 minutes for a district fire ambulance. Today, Mayor Marion Barry said he was outraged by that, and he placed 7 ambulance workers on administrative leave. Jack Clardy reports that the mayor also announced some new plans to improve the troubled ambulance service.
Mazone Kelly died waiting. Last Sunday, Kelly died waiting for District Fire Ambulance 17. The crew failed to look at a map, drove to 2 wrong addresses, and took 40 minutes to get to his home.
If they would have got here, you know, in approximately time, he probably could have been saved.
Today, Mayor Marion Barry put the 7 ambulance division workers involved on administrative leave and said he was outraged by their performance.
I just want to assure the public that even though this is the exception, it is totally unacceptable to this mayor for it to happen under any circumstances.
But there have been at least 5 incidents in the last year where ambulance drivers have gotten lost or gone to the wrong address, and the would-be patient died. Last November, for example, 20-year-old Lisa Wills died after the ambulance her family called went to 13th Place instead of 13th Street. Mayor Barry said a new communication system is in the works to solve the lost ambulance problem.
We have about $12 million in the capital budget to improve the communication system, including an ambulance locator.
The mayor also said he would try to solve the critical shortage of paramedics by asking the city council to waive the residency requirement so the city can go outside its boundaries to hire. And he asserted that the ambulance division is getting better.
But the ambulance service is working a lot better now. I've seen the reports. Our response time is down.
But Mazone Kelly is the 12th person who has died since September of 1985 after slow ambulance response time.
You've been saying since April, at least since April, maybe before, that you were going to fix this problem, and here it is January and we're still having incidents. Why should we believe you this time, basically?
You should believe me, because out of 140,000 calls a year, I'm not going to ever tell you, because I'm not going to lie to you, that there won't be some isolated incident.
Jack Clardy, News 4 Washington.
The mayor said he hopes to get the residency waiver request before the city council quickly and start hiring up to 100 paramedics.
That number is unchanged today if no one calls in sick.
Just in the street, I've had instances where paramedics have come in and said that they were functioning as an EMT because there was not a second paramedic or a second intermediate paramedic to ride along with them to allow them to function at the level that they were trained.
A year ago, ambulance dispatchers received no formal training, even though they have to make medical decisions to prioritize ambulance calls. Training was promised then, but so far, it hasn't been delivered.
The fire department has had its chance to work with and improve the emergency ambulance division since its inception. And I think that the test of time has shown that the ambulance division has not matured as fast as have divisions in other cities.
Dr. Shesher and other emergency room doctors point out that an ambulance service is a medical service, and they say it should be run by doctors. The fire department has not had a medical director since 1986, and it still doesn't have one. But despite all of the problems and all of the controversy, there are still many excellent paramedics and EMTs who go out on the street every day and try to make the system work as best they can. But the lack of progress has affected them as well. We're told that morale in the ambulance division is now at an all-time low. Jack Lordy, News 4 Washington.
We asked for interviews today with Fire Chief Theodore Coleman and Ambulance Chief John Kavanaugh, but those requests were denied.
Under the realignment, emergency health expert John Kavanaugh will run the Ambulance Bureau and will report directly to the city administrator, Carol Thompson. Dr. Harry Chen, who headed a task force that studied the city's ambulance problems, says he has mixed thoughts on the move.
I'm encouraged that the mayor has taken such a personal interest in the problems of the Emergency Ambulance Bureau. I'm also encouraged that he's realized that the problems in the Ambulance Bureau have eclipsed Chief Coleman's ability to handle the situation. I have some concerns, though, of creating a whole new administrative system, how it will work.
Still others are even more pessimistic.
My own personal feeling is that the ambulance service is a medical service, and therefore it is unfair to expect a non-medical person to have all of the administrative and managerial aspects of running that service.
Numerous paramedics and doctors argue the ambulance problems won't be resolved until the residency requirement is done away with altogether. The city has had trouble hiring qualified people.
The mayor's decision to try to remove paramedics from the residency requirement, I think that's a first step. I think that manpower shortage has been a considerable issue in terms of having ample number of highly trained individuals and keeping them on board.
Ambulance personnel have been ordered not to talk to the media on this latest move, but privately they agree with the medical community. They say this is a step in the right direction. Linda Lofus, News 4, Washington. Mayor Barry says he won't
A.J. Hudson reports her husband promises to work for reforms in the ambulance service.
He restored my soul.
They were saying goodbye to Elsie DeVonay, 49, a gospel singer who loved people and music. In simple services this morning, friends and relatives said she was a woman of peace.
I still see that glow on her face, praise God, with the love that she had for everyone. And I thank God for knowing such a beautiful person.
DeVonay had trouble breathing Friday morning. A fire truck and ambulance were dispatched after her husband called 911. The truck made it right away, but the ambulance got lost and went to the wrong. Elsie DeVonay was pronounced dead at the Washington Hospital Center 2 minutes after she got there. Her husband, Paul, still isn't sure she would have been saved if the ambulance had made a prompt response, but he says he will take his case to the mayor.
I'm going to give the mandate to Mr. Barry this afternoon and read the names, if possible, or number of all the people who have died in this city last year as a result of delays or misplacements of ambulances.
He asked them to hold hands and say a prayer for his wife. He said he would take flowers to the district building in memory of those who have died because of ambulance delays. The family is considering legal action against the district, an attorney looking into the delay.
What we have to determine first is whether or not the delay that the ambulance had in getting there deprived her of an opportunity to live.
At graveside services, a keyboard softly played Elsie's favorites as Paul said goodbye to his wife of 11 years.
I am going to dedicate every second of my life, every moment of my life, to make sure that her death will not cause another needless death in this city.
I.J. Hudson, News 4, Washington.
Paul DeVonay tonight has made good part of his promise. Accompanied by his lawyer this afternoon, DeVonay went to the district building, but he did not attempt to see the mayor or other city officials. He simply placed a bouquet, white flowers, a banner, and a framed portrait of his dead wife next to a locked entrance.
The defense was attending a news conference today held by Mayor Barry. The chief says his department will cooperate fully with the city administrator to solve the ambulance problem.
I look at it as adjustments made. I accept the adjustments. I think that we're going to go forward with it. We have made tremendous strides in the ambulance service in the last couple, 3 months or so, and we envision that it will get better as the time progresses.
During his news conference, Mayor Barry announced he's filled 6 top positions in his administration. Among the appointments, Wiley Williams, promoted to Deputy Mayor of Economic Development. Acting Director of Housing, Community and Development, Robert Pullman, was named Deputy Mayor of Financial Management.
But the areas of focus, I think, are pretty clear. We've got to work on the 88 and 89 budget. We've got to work on unfunded pension liability. We've got to look at the debt of the district. We've got to look at maintaining efficiency in government. And so that'll be some of the focuses that I'll have.
All 6 of these positions were filled by personnel already within the D.C. government.